Hello, this is Danny Pellegrino, host of the Everything Iconic podcast, and I'm here to tell you all about Splash Refresher, because hydration is mandatory, but boring is not. Now, I love my water, but if I don't spice it up, I'm not going to finish what I took out of the fridge. That's why I love my Splash Refresher, which is flavorful, delicious, bright, hydrating, and 0 calories. The wild berry flavor is my fave. No, wait, is the pineapple mango flavor my fave? You know what? All 5 craveable Splash Refresher flavors are my fave because they're so delicious. So get hydrated and enjoy it with Splash Refresher.
Changing Times, the Allenwood Conversations.
Proudly sponsored by Kildare County Council. So were you took undercover to go in undercover?
Yes, so to go in undercover.
Okay. Did you go in undercover?
I did.
As a drug addict?
A drug addict. The local dealers, they weren't expecting it. I was very lucky. The worst thing that ever happened to me was I was headbutted in the face. I have a little scar. I got a dislocated shoulder. And
you went in undercover and you pregnant?
Yes.
Mary, when you look across the parlous state of the world, we have to say, without being, complacent, there really is an awful lot of good and positive things to be said about our own country. There are a lot of people out there that are doing wonderful things right across society. On the other hand, there is that dark underbelly, sadly, and now more than ever, I think, and it can't be easy for the people who are the victims of it. And the people then who are tasked with keeping the peace, minimising the victims, helping the victims. And Garda Síochána, of course, right in the heart of that, an organisation so deeply embedded in the fabric of our society.
And my goodness, how the role of An Garda Síochána has changed over the years. What's remarkable, I suppose, to all of us is the adaptability of the force, truly impressive. The institutions and An Garda Síochána's evolution from a peacekeeping force to what they are now, modern, multifaceted. And, they have always really worked very, very hard to stay relevant and effective. And a real strength of An Garda Síochána, I feel, is the community policing, which is obvious all around the country. And nice to be able to say that I think it's a cornerstone of our society.
Absolutely. I mean, and the trustworthiness of our Garda Síochána, I think, is a really important aspect. One of the people who we associate over the last number of years with great leadership in An Garda Síochána is with us, Nóirín O'Sullivan. She'll be a very familiar name to our listeners. She's been a trailblazing leader in An Garda Síochána, the very first woman to hold the position of Garda Commissioner. Her career with An Garda Síochána spanned over 3 decades and, of course, marked by a huge dedication to public service, very significant contributions to modernising the force. She was appointed Commissioner back in 2014, brought with her a wealth of experience, a really clear vision for policing in Ireland, and then, of course, very, very tough times in that role. So we're just absolutely thrilled that it's going to be a great conversation with Nóirín.
Yeah, because Nóirín has always prioritised the fight against organised crime and terrorism, really from the beginning of her career, when she had such a pivotal role in the whole drugs policing. And there was also the challenges. She navigated the organisation through periods of intense scrutiny during her tenure and calls for reform, but her commitment to addressing these head-on and implementing necessary changes showed her resilience and determination, which I think is really two of her amazing qualities. She's sitting here with us today, and Nóirín, you're very, very welcome. Tá fáilte rót, you're welcome to Allenwood.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you,
great
Mary,
to have you
Mary,
here.
It's great to be here.
We know you as the Garda Commissioner, and that was when you became a household name. But when we were reading your story, the fact that you became a guard is a little bit of a coincidence. You went with your pal because she was a bit shy and she wanted to sign up. Is that it?
That's exactly it. So basically, I grew up in Coolock in Dublin. I suppose I had a very privileged background insofar as I grew up in a working class area from very humble beginnings. But my dad was from Glengarry from West Cork and my mum was from Clare, just outside of Ennis. And I suppose I had that great combination. So every time there was a break in school or anything, we were loaded into a car and we camped off to Glengarry. And I got that sense of place or that sense of home from my dad. He'd always say, we're heading home, lads. And then my mum, the holidays in Clare, and then growing up and going to school in Dublin. And a pal of mine, you know, I suppose if we take it back in the time that it was 1980s Dublin. I had left school in 78 and we were all kind of floundering around. And my first job was in a vegetable shop in Ballymun, which I absolutely loved. It was in the middle of Ballymun Shopping Centre. I loved it. And what I loved most was all of the old dears, as they would call them, that would come in to get...
The chats.
The chats were lovely. When I was at school, I wanted to be a vet. And the reason I wanted to be a vet really was, yes, to help animals, but more importantly, I felt it would give me an opportunity to travel the world helping animals. And the more exotic the animals, the better. But actually, at that time, nobody had really explained to me that actually if I wanted to be a vet, I would have to go to college. And I remember in 5th class, there was a nun and we had kind of career guidance. And she said, how would your parents ever afford to send you to college? Don't be ridiculous.
Oh, she said that to you?
Yeah. And I remember saying, and my mum and dad would have done anything for us. My dad was a taxi driver. They would have made any sacrifices. But I had younger brothers and sisters. And I remember then my mum and dad would ask, you know, what do you want to be? And I'd never say vet. I said, I'm just not sure. Which led my mum to sending off letters to every place imaginable.
Oh, she was applying for you.
She applied on my behalf.
I bet your mum wanted the good, pensionable, warm, secure job like every mother of her generation.
Exactly.
Permanent employment.
Banks, nursing might be a good option. And I think the break came one day when a letter came telling me that I had been invited to Aer Lingus as an air hostess, and my dad said, Betty, enough is enough. That's it. She's never going to make an air hostess.
Well, you had to be 20, I think, as well.
That's
didn't you?
right.
Back in
I was too
those
young.
days,
Yeah.
you'd have to fill in the 3 years.
Exactly. So basically then, come 1980, and a pal of mine, and she said to me she was going to apply for the Guards. And, you know, I hadn't thought about it. I didn't even know that women could apply for the Guards. And she needed a bit of moral support to go down to Coolock Garda Station where you had to be measured. And she wanted someone to go. And I'm a bit of a curious person and a little bit adventurous. So more out of a sense of curiosity and a sense of giving her a bit of support, I headed down to Coolock Garda Station where we were met by the sergeant and 2 guards, all men, of course. And I remember the sergeant was measuring her and they had a big long tape measure and everything.
This is for height.
For height.
Right.
And they didn't measure the women's chest measurements at the time, but they did for the men, which was interesting. So this sergeant asked me, why don't you apply? And I said, I'm not so sure. So he handed me an application form and he said, fill that out there. And while you're doing that now, I'll measure you as well. So long story short, I applied, put it to the back of my mind. And then the next day I came home one day and my mum, who opened everybody's post for them. Oh, absolutely.
Oh, she never heard of privacy.
Security was very high in our house. Nobody was going to get anything unfiltered. And she said to me, guess what? There has, what are you doing applying for the Guards? And I said, well, you know, I just thought it'd be interesting. And she said, that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. Like, what would you do there? And, you know, when I look back on it, I think her concerns were really a couple of things. So our first interaction with the Guards, my dad had been hijacked at gunpoint, had been put in the boot of his car, and his car was used with him in the boot for an armed robbery. So that would have been my parents' kind of...
so a bit of fright.
Yeah. Also, we were kind of coming out of the whole hunger strike, you know, the British Embassy riots, all of those things. So I think there was a little bit of fear when I look back on it. I also think that my mum, who was a very astute person, I think she was very worried about how would you fit in.
Culture.
It was very male-dominated.
Very male-dominated. You know, like, were the female guards? Very few, but did we know of any? None. So I think they were my mum's concerns. But anyway, not to be one to be put off, I packed up my bags and headed with my mum and dad to drop me at the gates of Templemore in November 1981.
Was she right, your mum, to worry about the culture?
Yes, she was. Well, yes, about the fitting in, because I think her concerns were not just because I was a girl or a woman at that stage, but I think also the fact that my background. So at that time, you know, a lot of guards came from the country.
You were working class North Dublin.
Working class North Dublin. A lot of people in my neighbourhood certainly wouldn't have been applying for the Guards. Certainly, I know that when I went into Templemore, you know, there was a thing about, like, kind of, what are you doing here? But interestingly, in my class, because from my group in 1981, and we all still keep in contact, which is a really good thing. But there was 4 of us went to Store Street, which was my first station.
How many women were in that training course?
So very interesting. So we had the biggest number of women. We had one more than the men, which was a big thing for us. So we had 23 and 22 men. And
I did not.
Yeah. So it was very interesting.
Whoa.
Yeah. And
I wouldn't have imagined that.
yeah. So it was time that actually. So
There must have been a big push on, was
a big
there?
push on. And but one of the guys that came to Store Street, maybe 4 of us went together, myself, another girl who was from Roscommon, and then there was 2 guys, one from Kerry, and he was killed on duty several years later, and then a guy from Walkinstown in Dublin, who we went on to work together later. So we all passed out in November 81, and I remember going to Store Street, and it was very interesting because, you know, even at that time in the Garda College, you know, nothing could have prepared you for what Store Street was. And I like walking about 10 now, so I often and I love that part. I love the north side of the city, and I love the north inner city in particular. And I often walk through there, and I think to myself back to the days when it was a lonely kind of footfall, you know, on the beach around O'Connell Street, minding the GPO, minding the BHS, you had all these posts. But when I went there first, I remember arriving on a Friday, and on Saturday, I actually had my first 2 prisoners. And that Monday, I went to court. And the funny part about going to court, it wasn't funny at all. It was daunting and terrifying. But actually, I remember some of the guys decided that they would give me a lift in the van, and in what we called Charlie Alpha 13, which was, you know, kind of our van. And going down, I had learned the arrest, charge and caution off by heart, so I knew verbatim. But nothing could have prepared me from meeting Judge O'Huig, who was in district.
He was legendary.
A legend. And I remember going in and just 3 steps up, but talk about stage fright, and I went up with my Bible in my hand, ready to recite my arrest, charge and caution. And next thing he said to me, "Oh, you're a new Bangarda? Take off your cap." And then at that time, the girls used to have to wear their cap. So I went to take off my cap, my hair was long and all my hair fell down. Everybody started laughing and I got complete stage fright. But I remember one of the guys came up to my back and he just said, "I swear by mighty God." And as soon as he said it, I was able to go.
Back in there, yeah.
So, but it was a very different place. And when I walk around the north inner city, I just think about how desolate I was, how downtrodden people there were. And I look now how much the city has changed. But I think it's very important that we don't forget how the people that were there and struggled through that, how they've come out the other side.
And Nóirín, was that something that was really to the fore for you as you were working as a guard, that a sense of social justice and looking after people?
Absolutely. You know, I always believed that there was, you know, people were always important to me. I was always curious about people, always curious about, I suppose now I can say understanding it. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, but always curious about people's stories. And I think that was one thing for me when I looked at, particularly, you know, it was different for women then. Women were called banners in the guard, so Vanguard, they wore skirts and little kitten heels. Not a whole pile you can do in your skirt with your inverted pleat and your kitten heels. But what really struck me was, even on the beats that we had then, which were confined to women, but you would meet other women that were younger than me, women that were much older, mothers and grandmothers. And they would get up, hail, rain or snow in the morning with their prams and their breadboards and head for the markets to get whatever they were going to sell, the traders, the street traders for the day. But they were great women and always cheery. What we started to hear about then, I'd be talking to them and they'd be saying how afraid they were and how concerned they were, because heroin was really beginning to come in, only then, and taking a real grip and impacting their families and particularly their sons.
And were you always conscious as a young Garda of, you know, that I'm a woman but I should be treated the same as all the men in this station?
Well, let me put it this way. When I went to Store Street, I didn't really know what to expect, but actually I knew what I didn't want to do more than what I wanted to do. And, you know, at that time, there were particular roles for women and particular roles for the men. And certainly, I suppose, there were a couple of eureka moments for me when I decided, actually, no, this is not what I signed up for. So I was very clear on what I didn't sign up for. And I certainly didn't sign up to make the tea or to be confined to some role that was seen to be a role for women. And, you know, I mentioned kind of speaking to the people in the community. One good thing that came out of it. So when the drug squad were going doing searches, the old drug squad, they wanted a banner. And I used to be only too delighted to volunteer for it, and they'd be delighted to have somebody that would volunteer to go with them. But what was great was kind of talking to some of the guys that were in the drug squad at the time, because they were all guys, and saying, look, this is going on here and you really need to know about it, because I was able to tell them what I was hearing. At the same time then, there were a group of other guys who were working in the special task force in around the C district, which where Store Street was. They were also working on the counter-terrorism side, but they were seeing and hearing things as well. So a lot of these guys were from Dublin. So, at that day, the old drug squad was led by Dinny Mullins and John McGuirty, and was made up of absolutely great people. And they really had, they had a handle on what was going on. But nobody was prepared for this influx of heroin and how it was so pervasive. The scale of it, and so pervasive, particularly in hard-hit communities. At the same time, there were another group that were working in the C district who were working from what was known as the Special Task Force at the time, and they were working on the counter-terrorism side. And when we come together and piece the jigsaw together, we were saying, actually, wouldn't it be really interesting? Wouldn't it be a really good idea that we would actually go into these areas, kind of make contacts, find out what's going on, kind of build up the whole intelligence picture, and actually then be able to give the information back to say, look, here's what needs to be done, and find a different way of doing it.
So were you talking undercover, to go in undercover?
Yes, so to go in undercover.
Okay.
Did you go in undercover?
I did. So basically, all of the local dealers, they weren't expecting it. So we could get into these flat complexes. We had some really very, very good seizures of heroin. We started to make a real difference in disruption. And it was the very first time that undercover techniques or tactics had been used in An Garda Síochána. The local criminals didn't really know what was happening. Interestingly, I was recently speaking to now a very established and senior solicitor in the courts, and he often reflects on this with me and said, we didn't even know in the courts what was going on, because all these prisoners were being brought in, there was all these seizures of drugs, and we became known colloquially as the Mockies, so mock drug addicts.
Okay.
Was that what you were undercover as, a drug addict?
A drug addict. And so we had to kind of blend in, we had to go in, yes, we didn't go in our uniforms, we had to kind of dress down. I remember one of my sister's wedding, and I was after getting my hair, which I thought was very cool actually, but I was after getting my hair kind of shaved, and my mum would say I dyed it copper. I thought it was a rather nice copper colour. But anyway, needless to say, I didn't make the bridesmaids cut for the wedding.
You didn't, because
but it worked really well for the job I was doing. Drugs. It was a very exciting time. It was a time that you actually really felt that you were making a difference. So,
Did you not feel threatened, though? Were you not worried you could be outed, or you'd meet somebody with a syringe who was off their head?
Well, that was something that was very real at the time, because at the time there was, society itself wasn't ready. A lot of robberies and jump overs, jumping over counters robberies with blood-filled syringes. AIDS took a hold as well. Then there were people using different types of drugs, so abscesses and a lot of, kind of manifestation in a physical way. So it was very, yes, it was very scary. And I can recall times that you say, God, am I mad? But actually very focused on the job that had to be done. And, I was very lucky. The worst thing that ever happened to me was I was headbutted in the face. I have a little scar. I got a dislocated shoulder. But actually, some of my colleagues, and there's been worse cases, as everybody knows, with some of my colleagues, but Jim, my own husband, worked with us. And he had a deep press fracture of the skull, which changed his work life considerably. And he also had, in a separate instant, compressed fracture of the spine. And so there were people that...
But these all assaults?
All assaults. And then when you look at, when I look at it in the overall context of the 89 members of An Garda Síochána that have made the ultimate sacrifice, there are things that actually I feel very fortunate and very lucky that actually they weren't even more catastrophic. Like I can recall other times when I was pregnant with, my 3 sons, but certainly my second and my third son. And I remember being at home while I was heavily pregnant with my second son, and one of my colleagues in the Mockies ring and say, would you come in for a job? I wouldn't advise it to young women now, but I decided, yes, I would go in for the job. And
you went in undercover and you pregnant?
Yes.
Right.
And I remember we were doing another job when I was pregnant with my third son, and I had to go into a house where there were these 4 guys, and then one of my colleagues was with me, but then the way they used to work was he had to go off with this other guy to get the drugs. I was left with these 4. And I remember being in a room with bunk beds, and I was sitting on the bottom bunk bed, And this guy was saying to me, oh, we're going to go and get gear and we're going to bang up. And I said, oh, no, I have to go for a test in the morning. So, it was kind of all of those things. So what I'm very proud of from that time is not just what we did. We were able to take the lessons that we learned and actually regularise and formalise it. And actually that led to the setting up of different units, but also then kind of what is now somewhat of an undercover unit in Garda Síochána.
How do you think, if you're looking at the drug scene today and the organised crime scene, what do you say to yourself and your husband about that?
Well, unfortunately, it's not gone away. And when I look back on our careers and my career, I think drug use has even got more and more dangerous because of all of the synthetic drugs that are there. And I would have seen that during the 90s with the introduction of ecstasy and and these laboratory synthetic drugs and what they brought about. Nobody really knew what they were dealing with either. And now you see all of these really, really strong types of not just synthetic drugs, but also pharmaceutical drugs. And if you look at the likes of fentanyl and the devastation that has brought right across the world, and I like to be an optimistic person, but you look at it and you say, actually, how do you deal with it? And it takes a lot of collaboration. And I was delighted to see the linkages that we started and the seeds that we sowed right back actually manifesting itself in some of the sanctions and the cooperation that's taken place with the Americans. Even our liaison officers, the Garda liaison officers now are in places that we wanted from the get-go. But now we have liaison officers in South America as an example, which would have been it takes a really long time to get ahead of the curve and even keep up with the curve, because these transnational organised criminals, they are multi-billion pound businesses. And they can actually invest a lot of resources, they can adapt and they can morph very quickly. And for law enforcement and security, you have to be able to keep up.
Are we ever going to get ahead of them? Can we get ahead of them? I mean, at the end of the day, all police forces operate within rules. These people don't operate within the rule of law, they operate the very opposite. How can we get ahead of people who don't have rules?
I think, and it is very difficult because, law enforcement security services are constrained by laws. They have no respect for the rule of law and they've no respect for the human rights of individuals that they're actually hurting and harming. However, I do think there's a reason for hope. So there's really, really good collaboration right across the world in terms of law enforcement and security services. We have the great, advantage in this country. We have a single police service, but we're also the security service. And I know that is the envy of some of our colleagues right across the world, because we can work seamlessly and bring all of that intelligence together. We can actually then action it through other security services and other law enforcement agencies to actually be able to be facilitators for better collaboration and sharing of information. And that's actually what will outwit and outdo, because all of my career working to outwit the bad guys and to be able to actually come up with, but that would be stand up in court and would actually result in successful prosecutions. If the community could see these guys and women who were holding themselves up as paragons of how to do your business and have the nice houses, the fancy cars, if actually the community could see those been actually addressed.
But isn't that a problem as well? Because there's a glamorization of criminality, and you've got to kind of, change that culture as well, don't you?
I think so. And there's the hard face of criminality. And then in my view, there's also the face that actually people see as harmless. So, for example, people taking their couple of lines of coke, sometimes more than they'll have their few pints, they don't actually realise how much that's feeding into organised crime and terrorism. Likewise with, snide handbags or bootleg CDs and all of this. People don't realise. So it's great if you can get the latest bag.
It's tempting.
It's very tempting. Yeah. And people don't necessarily link that and how that is actually facilitating, enabling organised crime.
And, we mentioned it in the introduction, Nóirín, and, talking about this whole area, it seems to me that a real strength is the whole community focus on Garda Síochána, isn't it?
Or, an organisation that came from the ashes of a civil war and grew up on the vision of Michael Staines about an unarmed police force. That vision has sustained. And that's something that Garda Síochána always prided itself on, and I believe have done and continue to do still really, really well. And I remember when I took over as Garda Commissioner, we had lots and lots of reports about, changes and reforms that were needed. And I remember saying, right, guys, because I really had a hunger for change all through my career. I wanted to make things better. I wanted to understand it better. So I said, we're going to take a point in time, which was 2005, and the Morris reports, which was a terrible time in An Garda Síochána's history. And, take all of those reports and recommendations, and by God, were there a lot. So as an example, there were 947 recommendations across all of those reports, right up to 2015. So that 10-year span. 947 reports from Morris, from the Garda Inspectorate, from the Ombudsman Commission, and various investigations and inquiries and everything that had been done. And I said, okay, we are going to distill these down. I think some people thought I was absolutely crazy, but I was determined if we were going to really reform and change and modernise and professionalise An Garda Síochána, we needed to get to grips and we needed to show people, because some of these were actually impacting communities, how victims had been treated or perceived they were being treated. All these things needed to be done. So we actually distilled them down, did a lot of work, and I wanted to keep that momentum going because there was a hunger for change in the Guards. We had come out of a very dark time with a lot of controversy, a lot of crisis, and I wanted to make sure that we put this report as the foundation, as the bedrock for how we were going to modernise and renew. And I remember trying to prioritise was almost impossible, but one thing was putting victims at the heart of the Garda service. The other one was professionalising. So like I mentioned, putting in place the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, the Economic Crime Bureau. So then also looking at our own people. How do we value our own people? How do we build the diversity and the inclusion that we speak about? But how do we actually build it? How do we get not just more women, but more minorities? How do we actually provide and facilitate them in bringing to work their whole selves? So, for example, our LGBTQ plus colleagues, how do we do this? And how do we show our own people we're valuing them? How do we also recognise the humanity? And how do we provide welfare support without making it look as if we're becoming all soft in a way that's acceptable to people and that people can open up? And also bearing in mind that we're coming from a backdrop of where there had been very severe austerity. So how do we get the right people, attract the right people into the Garda Síochána? How do we actually put them in places that, a bit like myself, the right people in the right places, the right aptitude for work? And then at the same time, simultaneously working with the government and getting it into the programme for government to increase our numbers to 21,000, 15,000 guards, 6,000 civilians. And then bearing in mind that when we were doing all of this, and I used to call it, we kind of have to keep the train on the track and we have to keep moving along, because we had one of the deadliest gangland feuds in the history of An Garda Síochána. With the Hutch Kinnahan feud that was going on in the background. We also had a lot of stuff going on in terms of dissident activity and those people that would like to disrupt the peace and the security that we had. But also then in the international context, there was a huge amount of stuff going on.
Changing Times, the Allenwood Conversations.
Proudly sponsored by Kildare County Council.
Hi, I'm Daniel, founder of Pretty Litter. Did you know cats tend to hide symptoms of sickness and pain? I learned this the hard way after losing my cat, Gingy. So I created Pretty Litter, a health monitoring litter that helps detect early signs of illness by changing colors, saving you money and potentially your cat's life. Pretty Litter is veterinarian developed, and it's the easiest way to keep tabs on your fur baby's health right at home.
Go to prettylitter.com and use code ACAST for 20% off your first order and a free cat toy. Terms and conditions apply. See site for details.
Hi, this is Paige from Giggly Squad, and I want to talk to you about Splash Refresher and my water intake. Okay, so you guys obviously know that I'm a hydrated girly, but sometimes when you drink that much water, it starts to just taste bland, and you're just like, I need something to spice it up. That's why I love Splash Refresher. It has 0 sugar, 0 calories, and it's a splash of sweetness. And they come in 5 different flavors. They're so good. Wild berry, acai grape, pineapple mango, lemon, and mandarin orange. My favorite is the wild berry because I just love a berry. So if you're like me and you're drinking water all day, then try Splash Refresher. It's going to absolutely change your water game, and it's good for you.
When you got to be Garda Commissioner, which was, a wonderful accolade to you personally, recognition of both your reputation and your experience and that vision you had. But did you find that the job itself just was overburdened with stuff?
No, not overburdened. What I think is, so when I applied to become Garda Commissioner, so I'd worked my way all up through the ranks, and the first time that there were competitions held, but there were internal competitions, was for Deputy Commissioner. And I remember being a very brazen chief a chief superintendent who, because the form said you could apply to be deputy commissioner, I applied. I was never going to get it, and I knew that. I wasn't applying and void, but I wanted to get the experience because this was the first time that a competition had been held. So it was a competency-based competition, which was completely alien to me and others. And I wanted that experience. But
up to then, how was it? People were just tapped for the job, was that it?
Yeah, I suppose the colloquial joke in An Garda Síochána was appointed and anointed, or anointed and appointed.
Okay. You got the nod. No process as such.
No process as such. I'm sure there was process in the minds of those that both appointed and those that were appointed. But anyway, this was a new way to do it. So when I was appointed Deputy Commissioner, I was very determined then that actually to start some of the changes. And
were you shocked that you got it?
I wasn't chief when I got it. I had to wait my turn. Yeah, so I didn't get it, but I learned the lessons from that because I wanted to get the feedback, and that was genuinely why I applied. But then when I was an assistant commissioner, I went to Galway and I really, really enjoyed it. And then I came back to headquarters into human resources and management and crime and security. So when the commissioner's job came up, obviously it was in the backdrop of my predecessor retiring. So it was an international competition, and that was the big difference. And I remember it was a bit daunting because I was in, if you like, I was the Deputy Commissioner Operations. I was also we had two Deputy Commissioners at the time, one who retired, so I was doing the two deputies' jobs. And then I had to stand in to do the Commissioner's job on an interim acting basis. So one stage I was doing the three jobs. And I used to joke with my staff and say, please don't let me disagree with myself, because somebody will look at this paper in 30 years' time. And who's this woman writing to herself and writing that? Yeah. So, and I had a conversation with my husband and my children, and I decided I was going to apply for it. And I think what was most daunting was the psychometric testing, because it wasn't because it was a psychometric test, but they were doing play out all of these scenarios. And I was saying, oh my God, if they only knew what I did every single day, I don't want them to come in and look at me.
What was your family's reaction when you said you were going to, ask them for their opinion?
I'm very fortunate, Mary, insofar as my family, some of the craziest ideas I've had, my family support me 1,000%. And in this one, they actually said, no, Mum, go for it. And I suppose the conversation we would have had, what if I don't get it? What then? And both of you know what this is like, because I was saying, like, what do I do then? Where do I flounder and go? They were saying, no, Mum, go for it. If you don't get it, so be it. We pick it up from there. Then I remember down in Barrow Lane, and I remember going into a bathroom, and there was a tiny little mirror, square mirror, and I looked in the mirror and I said, am I mad doing this? And I remember taking deep breaths and saying, no, I'm going to do it. And I went back in and continued on with the test. There were so many international applicants. There were so many internal applicants. And actually, I can say it now. At the time, I was saying, God, what if? But actually, I remember Cathy O'Toole went on record, as did others. Martin Fraser, as an example, was on the interview board with several interviews and saying, by far, Nóirín was the very best candidate. And I felt kind of validated in certain ways that I wasn't as crazy as I thought going for this job. But actually, even having the vision for what needs to be done, the reforms, and that was what I presented.
You came through the first ever international competition and open international competition for. Isn't it extraordinary that an in-house trained member of An Garda Síochána, a female, one of the first female members, comes through on her own merit and is by far the most outstanding candidate? That must have given you quite a sense of confidence.
It did. And I, as I say, it validated all of my crazy thoughts that I was saying, what am I doing? And, and like they only want an outsider. And, once I made up my mind I was going to do it, I always knew if I could get into that room, I always felt in my heart that actually I would prove. And that was something, even I remember learning to drive. My dad would let us learn to drive to prove ourselves that we could change the pints and the plugs and the wheel on the car, and then he'd teach us how to drive. But being able to prove yourself, and I felt that gave me a really solid basis then to step into the permanent job of commissioner.
I'm just thinking of your mother, though, when she opened the envelope way back then in 1981 and, was wondering whether you'd stick the course or whether this was a good idea. My goodness.
Yeah.
Were your mum and dad still alive then?
No, Neither of them. Neither of them.
Ah, dear.
And I was promoted superintendent in 2000, and I often think about this because they were both passed by the time I was promoted superintendent. But I know that they're still close, and I know that they would look down and look down.
Proud as punch.
Pride. Yeah.
And rightly so.
Yeah.
on the day she opened that envelope and all the worries she had about it. Would you like to be doing that for one of your own children today?
So one of my own sons is in the Guards, and I'm delighted he was. And actually, the guys that I used to work with would say, well, actually, he was probably in the Guards before he was even born. He was the one that came out in all those jobs. Yes, I would, because I think An Garda Síochána is a fabulous career. And you'd mentioned earlier, Mayor, about career in public service. I think it is, for both of you who served in public service, I think it is one of the greatest honours and privileges to actually be able to serve your country and to be able to contribute to public service. And so I would be only too delighted. All of my sons are involved in, I believe, public service in some sense, and they contribute in their own very special way. And it will give me great, and I now have a grandson, and I will be only too delighted if he were to, in years to come, do something or contribute in his own special way to public service, because I think it's so, so important.
How did you feel, when you would read a newspaper or get a report that, of Gardaí falsifying records, whether it's the pulse records, alcohol breath tests, wrongful motoring convictions, or worse than that, getting rid of motoring convictions for friends or pals, or financial irregularities at the Garda Training College, the whistleblowers thing? How did all that impact you?
It was very, very difficult because, as I say, we had a whole pile of things going on. And it's like any change programme. When you start shining lights into places and you try to fix things, all of a sudden things come to the fore. And actually, for me, when you get those reports, the first thing you say is, okay, what is it? Establish the facts, because that's the way I've been trained as a detective and investigator all of my life. What are the facts of it? So all of these things were given labels, and then there was in some of them, a lot of hyperbole around things, because actually I'm trying to explain those in so many different fora at the one time. And sometimes, quite frankly, having to explain them when somebody else had already used them to get out there, and then you're defending them. And as they say, when you're defending, you're losing. And it's not so much defending them, but it's actually trying to explain how this came about. This came about because of the work that we were doing to actually fix the organisation, to actually kind of rebuild the organisation. And then also, I can say it now insofar as, kind of piling on all of this on one person, of things that happened over 30 years. And it's not because I was the one person, but things that were historic in nature, practices that had developed over time. So arrangements that have been put in place as ad hoc arrangements. And I often say, outside of just the Garda area, if we look at any walk of life, and if you apply the lens of 2017 or 2024 as it is now to these things, actually it's a very different way of doing business. Every day I felt I was going out explaining, this is what's going to happen if you're actually trying to fix something. This is how it's actually how we respond to these things that are really important. We're outing all of these things. I was very disappointed that some people, including in my own organisation at the time, kind of leapfrog me to actually use these, to put them in the public domain, to cause more noise.
Do you think they were out to cause you trouble? Was it jealousy? Institutional jealousy? Sometimes you look back and I say, it's certainly a sense of entitlement. Not everybody wanted me to be in that job, let's be honest. Not everybody wanted me there, maybe because I was a woman, but maybe just because I wasn't them. So I certainly think that, there were people out to be meddlesome and cause as much trouble as they possibly could. Yeah. And then I also think there were people outside of the organisation that actually decided this was a good opportunity to kind of pile on the guards. Some people would say to me, maybe I should have taken a different tack, and maybe I should have just kind of almost surrendered and given in. That's not in my nature. So basically I was saying, no, actually I'm going to keep on with this programme of work, because this reassured me. So when I saw all of these reports, actually we're doing the right thing here, guys. We're actually kind of unearthing the things that are wrong, the things that we need to put right. And I suppose what I would have liked was to be given more space and time to do that. And actually, rather than that big pile-on that came, that actually people would step back and say, well, and give you time to do it, and then hold you to account for doing it or not.
Mm-hmm. And personally, Nóirín, at that time, there must have been difficult days when you just felt, I suppose, alone or isolated, or...
Yeah, as I said, I'm very lucky that I have my family. But one thing I would say is when you're immersed in I'll call it the throes of battle or the throes of change, whatever it may be. Sometimes, and I say this against myself, actually, I didn't notice soon enough the impact it was having on my family and those that were very close to me. What was interesting was in the middle of it all, not in the middle of it all, towards the end of it all, I actually decided I was going to take leave. It was so unusual for me to take leave, it actually appeared in the newspapers that I was taking leave. So
this is what people call a holiday. Yeah, Nóirínn's going on their holidays.
And even that was exaggerated. And, you know, but I did take leave and I did go on holiday and I went for big long walks. And, you know, and you talked about kind of every day, you know, and every time you turned on the television, the radio. So, you know, the media were delighted with this. And I have great friends in the media. I admire the media. I think the media is such an important institution of the state and truth. And yet you could see all of this been just used and a vortex created, actually, that was like an unending spinning of a whole pile of misinformation and wild allegations and things that you're saying, actually, guys, just stop and think about this. And then, you know, kind of going outward out of the organisation and I hoping that actually somebody was going to say, hey, guys, hold on a minute, and bring a kind of a lens of sense to this. But c'est la vie. But it's very, very hard on a personal level. Yeah. It's very hard because basically I had to keep the show on the road. I had to keep everybody internally in the organisation. As I say, I probably took less conscious notice of what the impact it was having on my family and really probably only found out after everything because they didn't want to burden me with their
what were
problems.
they saying afterwards?
They were actually delighted that I left when I left and basically, and it was very interesting, in the June before I left I was mentioning the International Association of Chiefs of Police and they were great colleagues at the time because I had them here in Dublin for an international meeting. So they knew the efforts that I'd gone to and they were saying, why are you taking this nonsense? You know, you can come, leave, come with us. So it was very, very difficult. And I think my family afterwards were saying, actually, we're just so delighted that you decided for yourself. But they were never going to.
When you did make that decision and then the period after it, how you transitioned from that to even more success internationally.
Yeah, well, I suppose at that time, I certainly didn't want to go. I felt I had a real programme of work to do and I was very determined I was going to do it because I'm a very determined creature. But anyway, for a whole pile of reasons, I decided I was going to go. And then, you know, also I was always confident that the tribunal that had been established, that would actually establish the facts and come to the truth. But actually having to wait for it and actually... The tribunal report came out the day before my son's wedding. And I remember saying, oh my God, and, you know, trying to kind of speed read a very big report and at the same time be meeting all the guests for the wedding. But, you know, as I say, I like to put these things in the rearview mirror.
You've said that you didn't want to retire. You did. And you've spoken right through in this conversation with huge passion about the work that you had done from the time you really went to Templemore. You must have had a sense of loss as well, Nóirín, did you, when you retired?
Yes and no. So yes, insofar as this was a job that I loved. Yeah. I loved An Garda Síochána. I really believe in it. I believe in the good people in An Garda Síochána and I believe in the role that we discussed that they do and how they serve the community. You know, yes, I could have just languished on, you know, all the great work that I was doing, that I could continue to do. But actually, I saw it as an opportunity to take my skills together. As I said, the International Association of Chiefs of Police were saying, come work for us. We would love you to be our ambassador.
And you did.
Put the I into international. But then I got a tap on the shoulder from a headhunter to say, actually, do you know something? There's a job in the United Nations as Assistant Secretary General for Safety and Security. And somebody has said, I think you would be a great fit for it and it would be a great fit for you. And guess what? I went off and did more psychometric tests and more interviews and more due diligence tests and all of the rest.
That was a big international job.
It was huge and it was absolutely wonderful. And you know what was really important about it? The job itself was absolutely huge. But actually, it just was a reminder to me, all of this great knowledge and skill and experience I've accumulated. I can now take this into the global stage.
Including all the downs as well as the ups.
And the experience, because I'm a person who believes in you honour the past, the experience and the history and everything that brings, the good and the bad, but you live in the present. Once I got into it, I knew it inside out. It was like, because people are people the world over. Culturally, there's differences, and once you respect that, being able to see Ireland get its place, its rightful place on the Security Council, it was absolutely fabulous. So I was not there representing Ireland, I was there representing myself. But as an Irish woman, I was delighted to see it and delighted to be there to witness it. But also then witnessing what democracy actually means. It gave me great insights into that, even the fact that there's an election someplace in the world almost every day, and what that means in terms of misinformation, disinformation, electoral
Does that worry you at the moment, the threat to democracy, pretty much evident around the world?
Yes, it does, because I think, we're very fortunate in this country that we live in a participative democracy. And how do we as individual citizens, how do we play our part and our role in that, not just here in Ireland? How do we actually come and play our part? Even recently, when Eamon Ryan decided he was going to retire from politics, and I felt he was very honest about his parenting responsibilities. I felt he was very honest about the pile-on him, even bringing in his deceased dad. And yet then you see people, rather than kind of supporting that and allowing him the grace and the dignity and allowing him to have the honesty of actually the way he expressed himself, but then to pile on that. And then the other person that two recent examples, Rosita Adeleke, an Irish woman, a young Irish woman at the pinnacle,
gold medalist at the European,
absolutely,
and
silver, gold and silver.
Sport. A fabulous young woman, a great ambassador for Ireland, and then the hatred and the vile abuse that she received just because she wanted to represent her country on the international stage.
But why do we even listen to that rubbish? I mean, how many people are actually saying that? And and we're talking about people who are anonymous, who hide behind anonymity.
And that's the power of social media.
And it is the power of social media.
And
it's awful to think that can actually get to her heart and soul and hurt her. It's just outrageous.
And I think the fact that we're all human, and there's something in my mind about the dehumanization of people. So if we learn the lessons of the past, and the terrible atrocities that were committed over years and years, and the reason we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Strasbourg Declaration is because of those terrible atrocities. But actually, to carry out those, we have to dehumanize people. So one of my wishes is that actually we could learn the lessons from the past, and that we could look at people with that sense of humanity, because I think if we allow it to continue, and if we don't, all of us, speak up in our own way against this. So most recently, I was asked to chair a cross-party task force on safe participation in political life.
By the Ceann Comhairle.
By the Ceann Comhairle.
One of our guests here as well.
Yeah. And, and the Ceann Comhairle was one of the few people, to be fair, that stood up and be counted, even during all of the issues that were going on. But what was interesting about that were actually, in order to provide a baseline, we did a piece of research with UCD. And we surveyed members of Parliament of both houses, and we also surveyed staff. Of the members that we surveyed, 72% of staff had received abuse, and the numbers of the members had also received abuse. But nobody signs up to actually go into this. But what's most interesting was the social media aspect and how this enabled the anonymity that the algorithms enabled. And then looking at the drivers. So what were the drivers? The drivers were misogyny, racism, homophobia, xenophobia, and intolerance.
Pure ugliness.
Pure
ugliness.
And the solution?
Impact of, the impact on individuals, but the impact on their families was something that resonated very closely with me. Because we forget that people that step into public office, let them be politicians, or their staff who actually aren't looking for any public recognition whatsoever. And the impact that this has on them, and how do you actually address that? And I think that's where, for me, the solutions are that we actually, I call it a coalition of the willing, that we all come together and that we stand up and be counted. And we say, this is not acceptable.
Upstanders again.
Upstanders, not in our name. And this cannot be allowed to continue in our name. And this is not about being able to wrap politicians up in cotton wool. This actually goes to the heart of our democracy, being able to have debate. We elect these people to represent us, all of us, with all of our different views, and we should have to be able to have absolutely diametric opposing views, but be able to discuss and debate them and have a discourse in a civil way. Respectful.
Decency.
And decency.
Basic decency.
And common decency.
Listening to you talk there, Nóirín, I mean, the passion is palpable, and the commitment and the empathy. And I'm just thinking, do you ever have downtime? Or what do you have hobbies?
If you ask my husband, he would say absolutely no, except tormenting him to do things that need to be done around the house. No, I do. You know, what I love doing is I love walking. And actually, I love losing myself on walks. And by that, I mean, you know, kind of going off the beaten track. It gives me headspace. It gives me time to think. I love just being kind of lost in nature and been able to kind of regrab. And interestingly, one of the things I love doing, I can never get anyone to come with me, is I love walking in the rain, because actually I love the scent and the smell and that feel of walking in the rain and coming out the other side of it.
Reconcile with the rain.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have a little grandson now as well. Does that take up?
I have a beautiful little grandson called Maya, who lives in West Cork, and my dad would be chuffed because my dad loved Hall's Pictorial Weekly, and he loved Maya. And Maya is an old West Cork name, and it was very interesting because when he was born and they decided what to name him, I remember people were saying to me, "Oh, I thought it was a boy." Actually, he's a boy, and his name is Maya, and he's a little darling. He's lovely. And,
how old is he, Nóirín?
He's 9 months.
Oh, lovely.
And he's a little beauty. He's a little darling. And quite interesting, my son told me a funny story the other day. So we had him down at the water he goes to water babies, so he's learned to swim in a pool and all of this. But he had him down at a small, so they live in West Cork. I'm very envious of the fact that they live in West Cork. But I had him down at a small little kind of slipway. A man came over, a pure, as my sons would call him, randomer. And he said, "Oh, beautiful baby, how old is he?" And my son was engaging with him and telling him how old the baby was. And he said, look at the fine big man. He's a fine big fella and a big strong man. He said, "Joe," he said, "he'll make a Garda commissioner someday."
Oh, no.
Ironically, and he had no clue.
No idea.
No clue. It was not amazing.
Meant to be.
And meant to be. So I'm watching that space of great interest.
Maya.
No
Garda
nepotism.
Commissioner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is he Jeremiah or Maya?
No, Maya.
The reason I asked you, is he Jeremiah, because I have my oldest grandson is Charles Jeremiah. Which was Charles for Cha and Maya. Cha and Maya.
Lovely
Yeah.
names.
That's lovely.
Lovely names.
Lovely, yeah.
Nóirín, there's one question that we ask everybody that comes in, because our theme is changing times, and you have described changing times and An Garda Síochána with great insight and clarity. Is there one thing in particular now, as you kind of at this stage in life, that you would like to change, either for yourself or generally?
I suppose there are a few, Mary. The one thing I would love to change for myself, we mentioned my mum and dad earlier. I always believe they're near, but I wish that they could have been here and closer to see my 3 sons grow up into the beautiful, gentle, kind people that they are, and caring people. For the world broadly, I think we've touched off, I feel that actually we need to learn the lessons of the past. I think we need to bring a sense of tolerance back into our engagement with each other, not just here in this country, but right across the world. And I mentioned the examples of some of our great athletes, some of our great public servants, and not just public servants, but people generally. And I think if we could change one thing, is to have more tolerance and to be able to actually look at people and see the humanity in people as opposed to see the inhumanity. And that's true even in the whole debate around migration at the moment. There are people who are genuinely fleeing persecution and horrific circumstances. And, to see the humanity in that. The third thing, it's not the only thing, but the third one I would say for now is also there's something for me about, we should be very proud of our state and our country and our nation. We should be very proud of the people that we have that actually step into those roles. I'm looking at 2 great people here. And we should be proud of what we have developed. And we shouldn't lose sight of that, because actually, it's not till you go internationally, and you've all seen it internationally, both of you, that actually people look at Ireland in awe and say, "Oh my God, you're, all the goodness." And yet we can't see that for ourselves. It's a bit like the wood for the trees. We can't see the great people that we have that are actually coming through, and we can't see the value in the people that we have. And, I'll call it our patriotism and our sovereignty and all of those things that I hold very dear and very close. I think sharing our experiences with others, to be able to let them see and shine a light into what we've come through, the goods and the bads, and be able to say, actually, guys, do you know something? Here's a system that works. Here are people, that can coach and mentor and help each other to actually get there. Because I do believe, the world is a stage and all of us are in it. And I think we all have to play our parts and step up for the good. And I think keeping the good in focus is one of my big goals for not just myself, but to make the future better for everybody.
And so we reach the end of another thought-provoking episode of Changing Times, coming to you from Allenwood.
We send a big thank you to our researcher, Anne-Marie Staunton.
And a special thank you to our producer at Dundara Television and Media, Enda Grace.
We're also really grateful to Kildare County Council for their generous support and sponsorship.
Don't forget to subscribe to Changing Times, share us with your friends, and please leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform.
Until the next time, from Allenwood, County Kildare, Slán Slán.
Changing Times, the Allenwood Conversations.
Proudly sponsored by Kildare County Council.
Hello, this is Danny Pellegrino, host of the Everything Iconic podcast, and I'm here to tell you all about Splash Refresher, because hydration is mandatory, but boring is not. Now, I love my water, but if I don't spice it up, I'm not going to finish what I took out of the fridge. That's why I love my Splash Refresher, which is flavorful, delicious, bright, hydrating, and 0 calories. The wild berry flavor is my fave. No, wait, is the pineapple mango flavor my fave? You know what? All 5 craveable Splash Refresher flavors are my fave because they're so delicious. So get hydrated and enjoy it with Splash Refresher.